A distracted millionaire on the phone buys ice cream for his 2-year-old son at the airport without reading the ingredients. Minutes later, the worst nightmare becomes reality. The boy starts choking, his face turns red, and he cries out for help while everyone watches, but no one moves. In the midst of the chaos, a poor 7-year-old girl standing by the airport entrance rushes toward them, and what she does next leaves everyone in shock. The shrill ring of the phone seemed to pierce the white noise of the airport terminal, an anchor holding Arthur to his world of business, even as little Leo tugged at the hem of his linen trousers. The vacation trip, the first in years without the calming presence of his wife, Sophia, was already beginning with the weight of an obligation. "Yes, handle it. I don't want excuses," he said, his voice firm, his eyes locked on his phone screen. Ignoring the buzz of passengers around him, Leo, with his golden curls and sky-blue eyes, insisted with the tireless persistence of a 2-year-old, "Daddy, ice cream! Ice cream!" Arthur made an impatient gesture, a silent plea for the boy to wait. But the call dragged on, a discussion of spreadsheets and projections that seemed infinitely more urgent. Finally, ending the call with a sigh, he looked down at his son's anxious face. "Ice cream, is it? All right. Let's get your ice cream." They approached the colorful ice cream parlor, an oasis of artificial joy amidst the hurry and stress. The sweet scent of vanilla and chocolate hung in the air. "Which one do you want, champ?" Arthur asked, already reaching for his phone again as he felt a new vibration. Leo pointed a small finger at the metal tubs. Without really looking, Arthur said to the server, "Give me a chocolate and one of that green one there." Pistachio, a word that, in a few short minutes, would become synonymous with panic. He paid with his card, never taking his eyes off the new message that had arrived, and handed the cone to his son, who held it as if it were the greatest treasure in the world. With the task completed, Arthur dove back into his digital universe, walking distractedly toward their departure gate. Leo, happy, took small licks of his ice cream, smudging his nose. The first sign was subtle, a small gasp. A tiny sound lost in the announcement of a flight. Arthur didn't notice. The second was a dry, insistent cough. He glanced up for a second, frowned, and muttered, "Eat slowly, son," before returning to the email he was composing. But then, the silence. A strange, heavy silence that finally made him lift his head. Leo was standing still, his eyes wide, the ice cream cone fallen to the floor, staining the polished white tiles. The boy's mouth was open, but no sound came out. His face, once rosy and full of life, was beginning to turn a deep red, almost purple. Panic rose in Arthur's throat like a wave of ice and fire. He dropped his phone, which shattered on the floor, and knelt in front of his son. "Leo, son, what's wrong? Breathe!" But Leo wasn't breathing. His small chest rose and fell in useless spasms. Terror took hold of Arthur. This man, accustomed to controlling empires with a phone call, was utterly powerless. He scooped his son into his arms and screamed, a guttural, desperate sound that made everyone around them turn. "Help! Somebody help me! He's not breathing!" People formed a circle, their faces curious, shocked, scared. Some took out their phones to film, others just stared, paralyzed by the scene. No one moved. Arthur's world had shrunk to this small body fighting for air in his arms, to the sound of his own heart hammering in his ears. Amid the chaos, on the other side of a glass door, a skinny little girl in a faded dress with large, attentive eyes watched everything. And as Arthur's desperation reached its peak, she walked through the automatic door and started running toward them. The girl stopped in front of Arthur, her small frame radiating an authority that belied her age and worn clothes. Her eyes, a deep and serious brown, didn't focus on the panicked man, but on the boy struggling for breath. "Lay him on the ground, on his side," she said, her voice clear and firm, cutting through the chorus of frightened murmurs. For a second, Arthur was frozen, his mind screaming that he shouldn't listen to a child, a stranger. But Leo's face, now taking on a worrying bluish tint around his lips, forced him to obey. He gently placed his son on the cold airport floor. The girl knelt beside Leo, ignoring the crowd that was now closing in, and with surprising dexterity, she tilted the boy's head back, slightly opening his mouth to ensure his airway was clear. "Don't give him water, ever," she instructed, looking at Arthur with a severity that made him feel like the smallest of men. Arthur, on his knees, felt cold sweat trickle down his forehead. Shame consumed him. He, who commanded board meetings with dozens of executives, who made million-dollar decisions, was taking orders from a child who couldn't be more than 7. And he was following them, because in the depths of his terrified soul, he knew she was right. He saw the calmness in her movements, the absence of panic in her eyes. She had seen this before. The realization hit him like a punch. While he lived in a world of luxury and distraction, this little girl had already faced life and death situations. The seconds dragged on like hours. Under her care, Leo's breathing, though still ragged and noisy, seemed to find a minimal rhythm, a thread of hope. A small, wheezing thread of air entered and left his lungs. The sound of distant sirens began to grow, a relief that almost made him collapse. The paramedics rushed in, parting the crowd with professional efficiency. Seeing the scene, the wealthy man on his knees and the poor girl tending to the child, they hesitated for a fraction of a second. One of the paramedics knelt, looked at Leo's position, and then at the girl, with a mixture of surprise and approval. "You did good, kid," he said quickly. Before starting their procedures, they placed an oxygen mask on Leo's face, and the hissing sound of the air seemed to Arthur the most beautiful melody in the world. They lifted the boy onto a stretcher, and Arthur stood up, his legs trembling. "Is he going to be okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Severe allergic reaction, pistachio," the paramedic asked, pointing to the melted ice cream on the floor. Arthur just nodded, mute with guilt. He was lucky. These first few minutes are crucial. Whoever put him on his side and kept his airway open saved his life. The weight of those words made him spin around. He needed to thank her, to do something, anything. He instinctively put his hand in his pocket, the gesture of a man who solves everything with money, and pulled out his wallet. His eyes scanned the spot where the girl had been kneeling, but the place was empty. He looked at the crowd, at the anonymous faces that were now dispersing. She was nowhere to be seen. She had vanished as quickly and silently as she had appeared. Arthur ran to the glass door, looking out at the busy sidewalk, but it was like searching for a needle in a haystack. The girl who had saved his son was gone, leaving behind only the image of her serious eyes and the overwhelming sense of a debt he didn't know how to repay. The sterile white walls of the hospital room seemed to shrink around Arthur. The only sound breaking the silence was the soft, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, a metronome measuring the life he had almost let slip away. Leo slept, his face serene under the small oxygen mask, a peace that contrasted violently with the storm of guilt raging in his father's chest. Arthur couldn't look away from his son. Each of Leo's peaceful breaths was a silent accusation of his negligence. He remembered the shattered phone on the airport floor, a perfect symbol of his broken priorities. How could he have been so blind, so absorbed in a world of numbers and deals that he ignored the most precious thing he had? The image of that girl, small and determined, kneeling beside Leo, superimposed itself over everything. She, a complete stranger, a child, had shown more care and attention in 30 seconds than he had all morning. He knew he had to call Sophia. Putting off the conversation would only make it worse. With trembling hands, he took out his second phone, his personal one, and dialed her number. Sophia's voice sounded cheerful on the other end, the sound of the ocean and her friend's laughter in the background. "Arthur, what a surprise! Did something happen? Did you guys take off yet?" The joy in her voice was like a knife in his heart. He took a deep breath. trying to keep his own voice steady. "Sophia, we didn't get on the plane. We're at the hospital." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. He heard her breath catch, the background noise fade away. What? What happened to Leo? He told her everything, not sparing the details of his own distraction. His failure. He told her about the ice cream, the panic, and about the girl. His voice broke at the end. He expected recriminations, anger, but what came was a choked sob. "Is he okay now? Really?" "Yes, the doctor said he's going to be fine. He's sleeping." "Thank God," she whispered, and he could feel the relief and pain mixed in that simple phrase. "I'm catching the first flight back." After hanging up, Arthur felt a new kind of determination solidify within him. The guilt was still there, a tight knot in his stomach. But now there was something more, a visceral need to find that girl. It wasn't just about thanking her anymore. It was about fixing something within himself. It was about understanding how a child, living a life he could barely imagine, possessed a wisdom and courage that he lacked. Finding her became a mission, the only thing that could, perhaps, begin to atone for his colossal failure as a father. But how? He didn't know her name, where she came from, nothing. She was a ghost. His businessman's instincts, dormant from the panic, finally kicked in. There was a way. One way. The airport security cameras. He couldn't just ask for the footage. He needed someone with access. Someone who could act quickly and without red tape. He called his head of personal security, an ex-cop named Donovan, a man who knew how to navigate the city's labyrinths. "Donovan, I need a favor. Urgent. I'm at the hospital with Leo. He's okay, but I need you to get the security footage from the main terminal. From today, around 10 a.m. Donovan, used to unusual requests, didn't question it. "I can get it, but it'll take some time. I'll need a good reason to justify the request. The reason is that a little girl saved my son's life, and I need to find her." The pause on the other end of the line was brief. "Understood. I'll see what I can do." Hours later, with Leo still asleep, Arthur's phone rang. It was Donovan. "Boss, I got it. It's incredible what the kid did. I saw her on the footage. She went out the main entrance, ran down the sidewalk, and got on a bus. The number 217. The camera caught it clearly." Arthur's heart raced. "Great. What's the route?" Donovan's answer came with a hesitation Arthur rarely heard. "That's the problem. The end of the line for that bus is Hopewood." The name Hopewood rang in Arthur's ears with a bitter irony. To him, the place was an unknown labyrinth, a blur on the city map he only knew from negative news headlines. The image his mind painted was of narrow streets, dangerous alleys, and a reality light years away from his penthouse overlooking the park. The hesitation in Donovan's voice confirmed his worst fears. Going there alone would be reckless, almost insane. But the image of Leo sleeping in the hospital bed and the memory of that girl's courage overrode any fear. He couldn't just send someone, delegate this task. This was a personal debt, a path he had to walk on his own. The next morning, after Sophia arrived at the hospital, taking over the vigil beside Leo with a look that mixed relief and a deep sadness he knew was directed at him, Arthur made his decision. "I'm going to find her," he told Sophia, who just nodded, her eyes too tired to argue. Arthur swapped his expensive suit for jeans and a simple shirt, an attempt to blend in, though he knew it was futile. He looked like a tourist in his own city. He drove his luxury car only to the edge of the neighborhood, where the paved streets gave way to a tangle of cracked asphalt and dirt paths. He left the car in a makeshift parking lot, feeling the curious stares of the locals weighing on him. Every step into the community was like crossing an invisible border. The air was different, thick with the smells of home cooking, damp earth, and a cacophony of voices, music, and children playing. The houses, colorful and stacked on top of each other, seemed to defy gravity. He had no plan, Only the photo Donovan had managed to pull from the security footage, the girl's serious face, her large, focused eyes. He started walking, showing the photo on his phone to people he passed. The first reaction was always the same: suspicion. A well-dressed man, clearly an outsider, looking for a child, faces closed off, answers were monosyllabic. Don't know her. Never seen her. He stopped at a small grocery store. The owner, an old man with a grey mustache, looked at the photo and then at Arthur, his eyes narrowed. "What's a man like you want with a kid from around here?" The question was direct, loaded with fierce protectiveness. Arthur knew he had to be honest. "She helped my son. He got really sick at the airport, and she saved him. I just want to thank her." He spoke with a sincerity he wasn't used to using in his negotiations, a vulnerability that disarmed the old shopkeeper. The man sighed, his gaze softening slightly. "I know who she is. That's little Lena, lives with her younger sister, Maya. Their mother took off a while back." The information hit him hard. Lena wasn't just a hero, she was carrying a burden no child should ever have to bear. The shopkeeper gave a vague direction, pointing up a steep alley. "Their place is the blue one, near the big maple tree. But be careful. The neighborhood doesn't like strangers asking questions." Arthur thanked him and followed the path. The air grew thinner as he climbed. Finally, he saw it. A small house, made of wood painted a faded blue, with a tin roof. The door was ajar. He hesitated, his heart pounding. What would he say? How could he offer help without seeming arrogant or patronizing? He knocked lightly on the door. No sound. He knocked again, a little harder. He heard the sound of shuffling feet, and the door opened slowly. A smaller version of Lena appeared in the gap. The girl, pale and with dark circles under her eyes, coughed, a dry, weak sound. It was Maya, and behind her, emerging from the dim interior of the house, was Lena, her eyes widening in recognition and alarm. Before Arthur could say a word, she glared at him. "What are you doing here?" The hostility in Lena's voice was a wall of ice. Her thin arms crossed over her chest, a defiant gesture that made her look older and stronger than she was. She gently pushed her sister back, positioning herself as a shield between Maya and the stranger at the door. Arthur, caught off guard by the cold reception, felt his rehearsed words vanish. He had expected surprise, maybe even a little curiosity, but not this cutting mistrust. I came to thank you," he stammered, feeling clumsy and intrusive. "My son, the boy at the airport, he's okay because of you. I wanted to—" He trailed off, unsure how to continue. Offering money suddenly felt crass, an insult to this child's dignity. "You don't have to thank me. I just did what had to be done," Lena replied, her voice low but firm. She started to close the door. "Wait," Arthur said, taking a step forward. "Please, my name is Arthur. I'd really like to do something for you. Anything." Lena's eyes sized him up. A cold, calculating assessment he usually only saw in business adversaries. She glanced at her sister, who coughed again, a sound that echoed in the small, poorly lit shack. That sound seemed to crack Lena's armor for an instant. A flicker of worry, of exhaustion, crossed her face. "We don't need anything," she said, but her conviction wavered. Arthur saw his opening. "Your sister, she doesn't sound well. I can help. I know doctors. I can take her to a hospital." The mention of hospital made Lena recoil. "No, she's not going to any hospital. They just want to take kids away." The fear in her voice was palpable, born from traumas Arthur couldn't even imagine. He realized he was handling this all wrong. This wasn't a problem money or influence could solve directly. It was a matter of trust, and he had none. "Okay," he said, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "No hospital. But maybe I could bring a doctor here, or at least some medicine, food." He glanced inside the shack. The poverty was stark in every detail. The bare concrete floor, the sparse and old furniture, the absence of almost everything he considered essential. Suddenly, the urgency of his mission shifted. It was no longer about repaying a debt, but about a moral imperative. He couldn't just turn his back and walk away, knowing the situation these two girls were living in. Just then, a harsh voice interrupted them. "What's going on here, Lena?" A heavy-set woman with a severe face appeared in the alley. It was Ms. Irene, the neighbor who rented the shack to the girls. Her small, suspicious eyes darted from Lena to Arthur, then to the expensive watch on his wrist. A flicker of malicious interest appeared on her face. "Is this gentleman bothering you, girls?" "No, Ms. Irene, he was just leaving," Lena answered quickly, trying to end the encounter. But the woman didn't move. She approached Arthur, a sly smile on her lips. "You seem like an important man. Lost. If you need anything, you can talk to me. I take care of things around here." Arthur felt a chill. The woman radiated opportunism. He understood that any help he tried to offer would have to go through her, and that complicated everything. "I was just thanking Lena for a kindness she showed me," he said, his voice neutral. "Ah, Lena, a very helpful girl," Ms. Irene said, her gaze fixed on Arthur. "But very needy, too. Both of them, poor things, all alone in the world. The rent's due tomorrow, you know." The threat was veiled, but clear as day. She was using the girl's vulnerability to pressure him. Arthur found himself trapped. If he left, he'd leave the girls at this woman's mercy. If he stayed, he'd become a target for extortion. He looked at Lena and saw a silent plea in her eyes. Not for help, but for him to leave, to not make things worse. The implied threat from Ms. Irene hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Arthur, accustomed to high-stakes negotiations, recognized the trap. The woman saw him as a walking wallet, an easy solution to her own problems. Any move he made would be interpreted as a sign of weakness, an invitation for greater demands. But Lena's pleading look, begging him to back off, hit him unexpectedly. She didn't want a savior. She wanted to survive by her own rules, however harsh they were. Ignoring the neighbor, he addressed Lena directly, his voice low and respectful. "I understand. I won't cause any trouble. But please, take this." He took a few bills from his wallet, not an exorbitant amount that would attract attention, but enough for the rent and a little more. "It's for what you did. You earned it." He held the money out to her. Lena looked at the bills, then at Ms. Irene, whose face twisted in a mixture of greed and irritation at being ignored. For a moment, the girl hesitated. Need fought with pride in her young eyes. Finally, with a swift movement, she took the money. "Thank you," she whispered, and before Ms. Irene could intervene, she closed the door, leaving Arthur and the neighbor outside. The woman huffed in frustration. "Well, then, at least it'll cover the rent," she grumbled, shooting Arthur a sour look before shuffling away. Arthur stood there for another moment, the sound of the closing door echoing in his mind. He felt he hadn't solved anything. He had only postponed the inevitable. As he turned to walk back down the hill, he felt more powerless than ever. The money was a temporary bandage on a much deeper wound. In the following days, the image of the two girls wouldn't leave his mind. Leo was already home, recovered, running around the apartment as if nothing had happened. But for Arthur, the world had shifted on its axis. He spent hours awake at night, his conversations with Sophia becoming a minefield. She saw his obsession with helping Lena as a form of penance, a way to deal with his own guilt. "You can't save the world, Arthur," she would say, her voice tired. "You have a son, a family. You can't get involved with these people. It's dangerous." He knew there was truth in her words, but the argument of safety felt hollow in the face of the reality he had witnessed. How could he return to his normal life, pretending Lena and Maya didn't exist? He couldn't. He sent Donovan back to Hopewood, this time with a more discreet approach. He asked him to observe, to find out more about the girls' routine, about who was looking after them, about their mother's situation. The news Donovan brought back was bleak. The mother, addicted to substances the community preferred not to name, had been gone for months. Lena had taken on all the responsibilities. She didn't go to school so she could care for Maya, whose health was worsening by the day. The cough was persistent and the girl was growing weaker. Lena did odd jobs, washing patios, carrying groceries, but the money was never enough. And Ms. Irene was a constant presence, always demanding, always threatening. The community, though supportive in small gestures, a plate of food here, some used clothes there, had its own problems and couldn't do much more. The girls were falling through the cracks of the system, invisible to everyone except those who benefited from their misery. The piece of information that shocked Arthur the most was the hostility from other shopkeepers. The grocery store owner, who had seemed sympathetic, now refused to give Lena items on credit, influenced by Mrs. Irene, who had spread the rumor that the girl was getting money from outsiders and didn't need help. They were isolating her. Arthur felt a wave of fury. The injustice of the situation was overwhelming. He decided to act, but more intelligently. Using his contacts, he found the girls and their mothers' full names. With this information, he ran a search of public records, and what he found left him breathless. There was an old case file with Child Protective Services, initiated by an anonymous tip about child abandonment. The case had stalled, lost in bureaucracy, and the tip, he discovered after a few more calls, hadn't been so anonymous. There was a name registered as a witness, someone claiming to be concerned for the children's well-being. The witness's name was Irene Mendez, the same Ms. Irene. She wasn't just exploiting the girls, she was building a case to have them removed, likely to get the shack for herself. And worse, a hearing was scheduled for the following week, a hearing that could separate Lena and Maya forever. The discovery of the hearing fell on Arthur like a death sentence. The image of Lena and Maya being separated, taken by social workers to different foster homes, was unbearable. It was the nightmare that explained Lena's panic at the word hospital. Miss Irene wasn't just an opportunist. She was a predator, manipulating the system for her own selfish ends. Arthur's initial anger gave way to an icy clarity. The vacation, the business deals, everything lost its importance. This was his fight now. He couldn't stand by while the lives of the two girls who had indirectly saved his own were destroyed. He needed a plan, and fast. The first call was to the best lawyer he knew, Mr. Davies, a seasoned attorney specializing in family law, known for his tenacity. Davies, I need you. It's a pro bono case, but it will be the most important one of your career, Arthur said, the urgency in his voice leaving no room for refusal. While Davies began to dive into the case's bureaucracy, Arthur knew the legal battle wouldn't be enough. He needed to win Lena's trust. He returned to Hopewood. But this time he didn't go alone. He brought a pediatrician, Dr. Evans, a longtime friend of Sophia's, a woman with a gentle smile and a compassionate gaze. He instructed her not to wear a lab coat, to bring only the essentials in a discreet bag. The approach had to be human, not clinical. When they arrived at the Blue Shack, Arthur felt his heart in his throat. He knocked on the door, and Maya answered. The girl looked even paler. Lena appeared right behind her, her body tense, ready for a fight. "What do you want now?" she asked, her voice weary. "Lena, I know you're scared," Arthur began, choosing his words carefully, "but I'm not here to cause trouble. This is Clara. She's a doctor, a friend. She just wants to see how Maya is doing. No hospitals, no social workers, I promise." Lena studied him, her eyes searching for any sign of a lie. She looked at Dr. Evans, who smiled at Maya. "Hi, Maya. I hear you've got a nasty cough. I get one too when it gets cold." The simple approach seemed to break through Lena's resistance. She looked at her sister, whose breathing was audibly labored, and she relented. With an almost imperceptible nod, she let them in. The inside of the shack was even more precarious than Arthur remembered. Dr. Evans sat on a wooden crate and started talking to Maya, treating her not as a patient, but as a child. She used her stethoscope as a magic telephone to listen to the girl's chest, turning the examination into a game. After a few minutes, Clara's smile faded, replaced by an expression of deep concern. She stood up and walked over to Arthur and Lena, who were watching in silence. "It's more serious than I thought," she whispered. "This isn't just a cold. Her lungs are severely compromised. She needs tests, strong antibiotics. She needs a hospital." The forbidden word hung in the air. Lena immediately tensed up. "No, I said no." "Lena, please listen," Clara said, her voice gentle but firm. "If she doesn't get the right treatment, she could get much worse. I'm not talking about taking her away from you. We can find a way. Arthur can make sure you stay together." Arthur stepped in, his voice filled with sincerity. "Lena, I give you my word. No one will separate you. But Maya needs help. The help I couldn't give my own son that day, but that you gave him. Now let me help your sister." A quick, painful flashback hit him. Leo, his face blue, fighting for air. He looked at Maya, seeing the same silent desperation in her eyes. The decision was Lena's. The girl looked at her sister, who was coughing weakly in the corner, and then at Arthur. Silent tears began to roll down her face. It was the first time Arthur had seen her cry. They weren't tears of fear, but of exhaustion. Her armor had finally cracked. "Okay," she whispered, her voice broken, "but you promised." At that moment, Arthur's phone buzzed. It was a message from Davies. He opened it, and the floor seemed to drop out from under him. "Bad news. Ms. Irene filed for emergency temporary custody of the girls. The hearing has been moved up to tomorrow morning." The message from Davies exploded in Arthur's mind like a grenade. Tomorrow. There was no time to plan, to build a solid case. Miss Irene, with the cunning of a predator, had fast-tracked the process, catching them completely by surprise. Lena's silent crying intensified, turning into sobs that shook her small body. Exhaustion and fear had finally overwhelmed her. Dr. Evans hugged her, a gesture of maternal comfort in the midst of the chaos. Arthur felt adrenaline take over, the same feeling that drove him in business crises. He needed to think, to act, to control the damage. "Davies is on it," he said, his voice more confident than he felt. "He won't let anything happen. But right now, the priority is Maya." The decision was made. They couldn't wait any longer. The risk of Maya's condition worsening was as immediate as the legal threat. "Clara, which hospital should we take her to? The best one. I don't care about the cost," Arthur said, already grabbing his phone to call his driver. "Saint, Luke's has the best pediatric wing in the city," she replied. "I'll call ahead and let them know we're on our way." The plan took shape in seconds. Arthur knew he couldn't just drive the girls in his luxury car. That would attract the wrong kind of attention in the neighborhood. He needed discretion. He called Donovan. "I need you at the base of the hill in 10 minutes. A plain car, no markings, and bring clean clothes for 2 little girls. Something warm." While they waited, Dr. Evans prepared Maya, explaining calmly that they were going on a car ride to help her breathe better. Lena, her face stained with tears, helped her sister get dressed, her movements mechanical, her eyes empty of hope. She clung to Arthur's promise like a drowning person to a piece of driftwood. The walk down the hill was tense. Arthur carried Maya, feeling the girl's fragility, the heat of her fever through her thin clothes. Lena walked beside him, holding onto the hem of his shirt, a small gesture of trust that weighed on him with the force of an anchor. No one said a word. In Donovan's car, the silence was even heavier. Maya fell asleep in Lena's lap, her wheezing breath filling the space. Arthur watched them in the rearview mirror, the image of the older sister protecting the younger one, a distorted reflection of his own failure. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. When they arrived, the team alerted by Clara was waiting for them. There was no red tape, no questions. Maya was taken immediately to the pediatric emergency room. Lena didn't let go of her sister's hand until the very last second, when a nurse stopped her from entering the treatment room. Arthur led her to the waiting room, a sterile, impersonal space. Lena curled up in one of the plastic chairs, hugging her knees. She wasn't crying anymore, just staring at a fixed point on the wall, lost in her own fears. Arthur sat beside her, not knowing what to say. Words seemed useless. Instead, he did the only thing he could. He sat there, in silence, his presence a mute promise that she was not alone. Hours passed, the sun set, and the cold hospital lights illuminated the waiting room. Finally, Dr. Evans appeared. Her expression was serious. "She's stable. We got here just in time. It's a severe bacterial pneumonia, complicated by malnutrition. She's going to need to be admitted for a while, on IV antibiotics." Lena looked up. "Can I stay with her?" "Yes," Clara said. "We've arranged for a private room. You can stay with her the whole time." The relief on Lena's face was so profound, it almost made her collapse. She looked at Arthur, and for the first time, he saw something other than fear or suspicion in her eyes. It was a glimmer of gratitude. But the calm was short-lived. Arthur's phone rang. It was Davies. "Arthur, the judge granted the emergency request. The hearing is tomorrow at 9, and he wants to hear from the girl. He wants to hear from Lena." The news that Lena would have to testify at the hearing landed like a bomb in the hospital waiting room. The girl, who had just found a moment of relief, shrank back into herself, fear returning to her eyes. Arthur felt a surge of fury at the system, at the coldness of a law that would require a traumatized 7-year-old to face a courtroom. "That's absurd, Davies. She's in no condition," he said into the phone, his voice low and tense, so as not to frighten Lena further. "I know, Arthur, but the judge is adamant," the lawyer replied. "Ms. Irene's claim is abandonment and neglect. She's painting herself as the only concerned caregiver. Lena's word is the only thing that can refute that. It's our best shot." Arthur hung up, the weight of responsibility crushing him. He had promised to protect the girls, but now he had to ask Lena to face her greatest fear. He knelt in front of her chair, catching her gaze. "Lena," he began, his voice soft, "I know this is scary, and I'm not going to lie. It will be hard. But you are the bravest person I know. You saved my son. You took care of your sister all by yourself. You can do this." She just shook her head, tears welling up again. "They're going to take me away from Maya," she whispered, the phrase that was the root of all her fears. "No, they won't," Arthur said with a conviction he needed to feel as much as she did. "I will be there with you. Mr. Davies, the lawyer, will be there too. We will not let that happen. You just have to tell the truth. Tell them how you take care of your sister, how much you love each other. No one can fight against that." He saw the doubt in her eyes, the internal battle between terror and a small spark of determination. The mention of her sister seemed to steel her resolve. Caring for Maya was her compass, her reason for being. The night was long and virtually sleepless. Arthur arranged for everything, new clothes for Lena, food, and ensured the hospital room was comfortable. He and Sophia took turns. While one stayed with Lena, the other went home to see Leo, a silent changing of the guard marked by tense glances. Sophia, despite her initial reservations, was now fully invested. Seeing the situation up close, the fragility of Maya and the strength of Lena had broken down her defenses. She talked with the girl, not about the court, but about simple things, about drawings and favorite colors, trying to create a small bubble of normalcy in the middle of the hurricane. In the morning, the tension was palpable. Lena barely touched her breakfast. Dressed in a simple new dress and flats, she looked even smaller and more vulnerable. At the courthouse, the atmosphere was oppressive. Cold marble hallways, the echo of hurried footsteps, the air thick with human drama. Ms. Irene was already there, sitting on a bench with an expression of false pity, accompanied by a slick, low-rent lawyer. When she saw Arthur and Lena, she shot them a venomous look. Davies met them at the entrance, a middle-aged man with a reassuring face and intelligent eyes. He knelt to speak to Lena. "Hello, Lena. My name is Alfonso. I'm on your side. I just want you to remember one thing in there. Just tell the truth. It's your most powerful weapon." The courtroom was small and intimidating. The judge, a stern-looking man, peered at them over his glasses. The social worker present in the room had a tired, almost indifferent expression. The hearing began. Ms. Irene spoke first, her voice tearful, a performance of concern. She painted a picture of abandonment, of two children left to fend for themselves, implying that Lena was incapable of caring for her sister. Arthur felt his blood boil. Then it was Lena's turn. She walked to the witness chair, her little legs barely touching the floor. The judge leaned forward. "So, young lady, tell me, is it true that you and your sister live alone?" Lena looked at Arthur, then at the judge. She took a deep breath, her voice barely a whisper. "We don't live alone. We take care of each other." The simplicity and depth of the answer made a silence fall over the room. The judge seemed, for the first time, genuinely taken aback. Lena's answer hung in the air, disarming the cold formality of the room. The judge, Judge Wallace, a man accustomed to rehearsed speeches and crocodile tears, leaned back in his chair, observing the girl with a new intensity. He saw the lack of artifice, the raw truth in her serious eyes. "You take care of each other," he repeated, his voice softer. "Explain to me how Lena..." The girl, encouraged by the judge's attentive silence, began to speak. Her voice, at first trembling, gained strength as she described her routine. She didn't speak of suffering or abandonment. She spoke of responsibility and love. She told them how she prepared Maya's food, mashing a banana to make it easier to swallow. She described how she checked her sister's fever with her hand on her forehead, how she covered her at night and sang lullabies to calm her cough. She talked about the odd jobs she did, not as a burden, but as a way to buy cough syrup or softer bread for her sister. Every word was a brick, building a powerful image of dedication that completely dismantled Ms. Irene's narrative of neglect. The social worker, previously apathetic, was now taking frantic notes, her gaze fixed on Lena. Arthur and Davies exchanged discreet glances. The strategy of letting the truth speak for itself was working better than they could have hoped. Ms. Irene's lawyer tried to object, claiming it was irrelevant, but the judge silenced him with an impatient wave. He was completely captivated. "And your mother, Lena, where is she?" the judge asked. The girl hesitated, her gaze briefly lost. "She went on a trip. She'll be back one day," she said, her childlike loyalty intact, a fiction she had created to protect herself and her sister from the harsh reality. The answer, in its simplicity, was more moving than any accusation. When it was Arthur's turn, he spoke calmly and precisely. He recounted the incident at the airport, focusing not on his own panic, but on Lena's knowledge and calm. He described the scene not as an impulsive act of heroism, but as the action of someone trained by daily caregiving. "Your Honor, I am a witness that this girl is not negligent. On the contrary, she possesses a capacity for care that many adults, myself included, lack. The only negligence I saw that day was my own." He then laid out the situation with Ms. Irene, the rent collection, the veiled threats, the way she tried to isolate the girls from the community. Davies presented the evidence he had managed to gather in such a short time. The testimony of the grocery store owner, who, encouraged by Arthur, had agreed to speak about the pressure he was under, and the records of previous complaints filed by Ms. Irene, showing a pattern of harassment. Ms. Irene's face went from outrage to panic. Her castle of lies was crumbling. The judge stared at her, his gaze as cold as steel. "Do you have anything to say about these allegations?" She stammered and denied it, but her credibility was destroyed. The hearing was adjourned. The judge announced that the decision on custody would be delivered at the end of the afternoon. The wait was agonizing. They returned to an anteroom, the silence heavy with anticipation. Lena was exhausted, the adrenaline having left her. She leaned against Arthur, almost falling asleep. He could feel her breathing against his arm, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Finally, they were called back into the courtroom. The judge looked at the papers on his desk, and then at everyone present. After reviewing the facts, and especially the testimony of Lena, he paused for what felt like a lifetime. It is clear to this court that the custody petition filed by Ms. Irene Mendez is not only unfounded, but malicious. Petition denied. A collective sigh of relief swept through their side of the room, but the judge wasn't finished. However, the vulnerable situation of the minors is undeniable. They cannot go back to living alone. Arthur's heart froze. Had he won the battle only to lose the war? The judge continued, "Therefore, I am awarding temporary custody of the minors, Lena and Maya, to Mr. Arthur Hayes." The judge's decision echoed in the room like the striking of a gong, leaving Arthur stunned. Temporary custody. To him, the responsibility for these two lives, which until a few weeks ago had been complete strangers, now fell squarely on his shoulders. He looked at Lena, who was staring back at him with wide eyes, a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Then he looked at Davies, who gave him an encouraging nod, as if to say, "This is it. It's on you now, Ms." Irene let out a sound of indignation, but a glare from the judge silenced her. The battle was won, but a much more complex journey was just beginning. How would he explain this to Sophia? How would he integrate two girls, scarred by trauma and poverty, into his meticulously organized life? His penthouse, once a sanctuary of peace and order, was about to become uncharted territory. The first call was to his wife. He stepped away into a corner of the hallway, his voice low. "Sophia, we won. They're safe. But there's something else." He explained the judge's decision. On the other end of the line, the silence was long, filled with a weight he could physically feel. Arthur braced for resistance, for the logical questions about space, routines, the impact on Leo. But Sophia's response surprised him. "Bring them home, Arthur," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We'll figure it out. They need us." In that moment, Arthur felt a wave of love and admiration for his wife, a woman whose compassion transcended any social convention. Their partnership, so often overshadowed by routine and business, revealed itself in its full strength. The return to the hospital was surreal. Lena didn't speak, merely processing the monumental turn her life had taken. The idea of a home that wasn't the little blue shack was abstract, almost frightening. At the hospital, they told Maya, who was still weak but now breathing more easily. "We're going to live with Uncle Arthur for a while," Lena explained softly, holding her sister's hand. Maya just smiled, a faint smile, happy to have her sister by her side, not understanding the magnitude of the change. The transition was a whirlwind. Arthur and Sophia turned the guest room into a sanctuary for the girls, with new beds, clothes and toys. Leo, with the innocent curiosity of a child, was fascinated by his new sisters. He offered his toy cars to Lena, who accepted them with a confused solemnity, unsure how to play. But the challenges soon appeared, small emotional earthquakes in their daily life. Lena would wake up in the middle of the night screaming from nightmares. She had trouble accepting the abundance of food, hiding pieces of bread under her pillow, a habit born of scarcity. Maya, though improving physically, was shy and frightened, clinging to Lena as her only anchor. There was a cultural and emotional chasm between their two worlds. Sophia, with infinite patience, tried to build bridges. She taught Lena to read, told stories to Maya, and created a routine of affection and security. Arthur, for his part, discovered a new role. He was no longer just the distant provider. He was a father to 3 children. He learned how to comfort Lena after a nightmare, how to make Maya laugh with silly faces, how to mediate the small disputes over toys between them and Leo. His life was turned upside down. Business meetings were postponed, trips cancelled. His focus was at home. He realized how much of Leo's childhood he had missed, immersed in his work. Now, he was rediscovering the joy of a family breakfast, of an afternoon in the park. However, the adjustment was not a straight path. There were moments of frustration, of doubt. On one particularly difficult night, after Lena had an inconsolable crying spell, Arthur sat on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. Sophia joined him. "Are we doing the right thing?" he asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Arthur, the right thing is rarely the easy thing," she replied, placing her hand on his. "Look at them. They're safe. They're together. Maya is healing. Lena is starting to smile. That's what matters." Just then, they heard a noise. It was Lena, standing in the doorway to the balcony, holding a drawing. It was a colorful sketch of 5 people holding hands. "It's our family," she said in a small voice, handing the paper to Arthur. The simple, imperfect drawing was the answer he needed. The months that followed were a tapestry woven with threads of progress and setbacks. Arthur and Sophia's home filled with a new life, a noisy, loving chaos they had never imagined. Maya, with ongoing medical treatment and proper nutrition, blossomed. The pale, sick child gave way to a rosy-cheeked, laughing girl whose cough had vanished completely. She followed Leo all over the apartment, the two forming an inseparable pair of explorers. Lena, in turn, began to let her guard down. Gradually, the bread stopped appearing under the pillow. The nightmares became less frequent. With the help of a child psychologist Arthur had hired, she began to process her trauma and allow herself to be a child. The weight of the world she had carried for so long on her small shoulders started to dissipate. She smiled more, a genuine smile that lit up her face. Arthur was transformed. The ruthless executive gave way to a present and attentive father. He discovered that the true measure of his success wasn't in stock charts, but in Leo's spontaneous hugs, Maya's laughter, and the look of trust Lena gave him. He reorganized his life, delegated more at work, and started picking the kids up from school. Lena and Maya had been enrolled, and despite their initial delay, were learning eagerly. He reveled in the small victories. The first time Lena read a full sentence, Maya's first goal in a garden game, the way the 3 children now called each other siblings. Sophia was the rock of this new family, the gravitational center that held everyone together with her calm and unconditional love. However, the legal battle was not over. The custody was temporary. Davies warned them that the adoption process would be long and complex. The girl's mother still had parental rights, and although she was missing, the system required an exhaustive search before any permanent decision could be made. Furthermore, Miss Irene had not given up. Defeated in court, she resorted to dirtier tactics. She spread vicious rumors through the neighborhood and to tabloid reporters, painting Arthur as an eccentric millionaire who was buying poor children to satisfy a whim. Anonymous tips started coming into Child Protective Services, forcing visits from social workers who, despite seeing the girls were thriving, created a climate of instability and fear. The breaking point came on a rainy afternoon. Arthur was in his home office, reviewing some documents, when he got a call from Davies. The lawyer's voice was grave. "Arthur, they've found their mother." Arthur's heart stopped. "Where? How is she?" "In a shelter downtown, and she wants her daughters back." The news hit him like a punch to the gut. All the progress, all the security they had built seemed about to crumble. Legally, the mother had preference. The thought of ripping Lena and Maya from this safe environment and returning them to a situation of uncertainty and neglect was a nightmare. That night, The atmosphere in the house was heavy. Lena, with the sharp intuition of someone who had always lived on high alert, sensed something was wrong. "Did something happen?" she asked Arthur as he tucked her into bed. Arthur looked at this girl who had become his daughter in every way but on paper, and his heart broke. He couldn't lie to her. "Lena, they found your mother." He saw the whirlwind of emotions in her eyes, a flicker of hope, quickly replaced by fear and an old sorrow. "Is she going to take us away?" she asked, her voice a thread. Arthur hugged her tightly. "I won't let that happen. I promised you that no one would separate you, and I promised I would take care of you, and I will keep my promises, no matter what it takes." In that moment, he knew there was no turning back. He would fight with everything he had, risking his reputation, his fortune, his peace, to keep this family together. The final battle was about to begin. The final hearing was scheduled. This time, the atmosphere at the courthouse seemed even more charged. Arthur, Sophia, and Davies sat on one side, a united front of anxiety and determination. On the other side sat the girl's mother, a frail and worn-out figure, next to a public defender. Lena and Maya were not present. Davies had insisted they be spared this confrontation. The mother, named Celia, looked lost, her eyes hollow and tired, her skin marked by a hard life. She didn't look like a villain, but a victim of her own circumstances, which made the situation even more painful and complex. Judge Wallace presided again, his face impassive. He heard from the mother first. Celia spoke in a low, hesitant voice. Telling her story, she spoke of a life of broken promises, bad choices, and the addiction that had consumed her. "I love my daughters," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know I messed up, I failed them, but I'm trying to get better. I'm in a program. I've been clean for 2 months. I just want a second chance. They're all I have." The plea was moving and genuine. Arthur felt a lump in his throat. There was no malice in Celia, only deep pain, but love. He knew he was sometimes not enough. Davies then began his argument. He did not attack Celia. On the contrary, he spoke respectfully of her struggle. But he presented facts. He showed Maya's medical reports, detailing the state of malnutrition and pneumonia that had nearly killed her. He presented the reports from Lena's psychologist, which described the trauma of abandonment and the parentification syndrome, where a child is forced into an adult role. He showed pictures of the girls' lives now, healthy, happy, integrated into a school and family routine. "Your Honor, no one here doubts the love Ms. Celia has for her daughters," Davies said, his voice firm. "But what is at stake is not the past, nor even good intentions for the future. What is at stake is the well-being and stability of 2 children who have already suffered the unimaginable. The bond they have formed with Arthur and Sophia is not just emotional. It is vital. It is the anchor that has allowed them to begin to heal their wounds." The judge then asked to hear from Arthur. He stood, not as the powerful businessman, but as a father. He didn't talk about what he had given the girls. He talked about what they had given him. "They taught me what's important in life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They taught me about courage, about resilience, about unconditional love. They saved my life in a much more profound way than Lena saved my son that day. They gave me a real family. To take that away from them now would be the greatest cruelty of all." He looked at Celia, not with anger, but with compassion. "I understand your pain, and I want you to know that whatever happens, your daughters will never stop knowing that you love them. I will make sure of it, but their home, their safety, is with me now." The judge called a recess to deliberate. The wait was the longest of Arthur's life. He held Sophia's hand tightly, both of them praying in silence. Finally, they were called back in. Judge Wallace looked at everyone in the room, his face revealing the difficulty of the decision. "This is one of the hardest decisions I have ever had to make. On one side, we have the biological right of a mother seeking redemption. On the other, the emotional stability and well-being of two children. He paused for a long time, analyzing all the evidence and putting the best interests of the minors above all else. I hereby order the termination of parental rights. He turned to Arthur and Sophia, and I grant the full adoption of Lena and Maya Hayes to the petitioners. The sound of a sob cut through the silence. It wasn't Celia's, it was Arthur's. He collapsed into his chair, the relief so overwhelming it left him weak. Sophia hugged him, crying with him. The war was over. As they left, Arthur saw Celia huddled on a bench. He walked over to her. "I'm so sorry," he said sincerely. She looked up, her eyes glistening. "Take good care of them," she whispered. "Promise me." "I promise," Arthur replied. "And when you're ready, and they are too, the door will always be open for you to visit." It was the beginning of a new kind of family. Complex and imperfect, but built on a solid foundation of love and sacrifice. 1 year later, the airport terminal looked different. To Arthur, the place that had been a symbol of panic and guilt now seemed like a stage for miracles. The white noise of flight announcements and the buzz of passengers no longer caused him stress. He stood there, holding hands with Sophia, watching his 3 children with a sense of gratitude so deep it was almost painful. Leo, now 3, ran excitedly, pushing a small toy airplane. Maya, completely healthy and full of life, tried to keep up, her laughter echoing through the terminal. And Lena, nearly 9, watched them with a peaceful smile, the old seriousness in her eyes replaced by a glow of contentment. She was no longer the exhausted guardian, but a protective and loving older sister. They were waiting for Celia to arrive. After months of therapy and hard work, she was stable and rebuilding her life. The visits, at first timid and supervised, had become a regular event, an important part of their new family dynamic. Lena spotted her first, waving enthusiastically. Celia smiled when she saw them, a genuine smile, free from the pain of the past. She hugged her daughters tightly, an embrace not of possession, but of pure love and pride. Then she hugged Arthur and Sophia. There was no more awkwardness between them, only a mutual respect forged in the most difficult of circumstances. As they walked to a cafe, Leo stopped suddenly, pointing to the ice cream parlor. "Daddy, ice cream," he said, the same words that a year ago had nearly ended in tragedy. A chill ran down Arthur's spine, a phantom memory. Sophia squeezed his hand, sensing his tension. Lena, noticing her father's look, came closer. "It's okay," she said, her voice full of a wisdom that still surprised him. "We know how to read the ingredients now." At the ice cream shop, the sweet smell was no longer threatening. It was just ice cream. Arthur knelt in front of Leo. "Which one do you want, champ? But no pistachio, deal." Leo pointed to the strawberry. Lena chose chocolate, and Maya picked vanilla. They all sat together at a table, a large, loud, and happy family. Arthur watched the scene, every detail etching itself into his memory. Leo's nose smudged with ice cream. Maya's laugh, the way Lena helped her little sister stay clean, the knowing glance he shared with Sophia. He remembered that terrible day, the man he used to be, distracted, absent, living on autopilot. That man no longer existed. In his place was a father, a husband, a man who had learned that true wealth wasn't in bank accounts or business empires, but in these simple, precious moments. The crisis had broken him, shattered his priorities, and forced him to rebuild himself from the ground up. And in the process, he had found himself. He had found a purpose greater than material success. The journey had been arduous, full of obstacles and pain, but every step had been worth it. He looked at Lena, the little hero who, with one act of courage, had started this entire revolution in his life. She hadn't just saved Leo, she had saved them all. She had saved him from an empty life. He reached across the table and touched her arm. "Thank you, Lena." She smiled, understanding everything that went unsaid in those simple words. The airport, once the stage of his greatest fear, had become the symbol of his new beginning. It was where his old life had ended and his new, richer, more meaningful life had begun. And as the afternoon sun streamed through the glass windows, illuminating the faces of his family, Arthur Hayes felt, for the first time in his life, a complete and absolute peace.